Hi, everybody, and welcome to A Gem of a Secret podcast. As the times have changed, we think it's really important to remind everybody about accessibility. And to do that, we want to re-release the episode where we interviewed Anne J. Tifah, the queen of letting us know when we could be a little bit better.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to A Gem of a Secret podcast. My name is Donatella My Secrets.
And my name is Coco Gem Holiday.
How you doing tonight, Coco?
I'm feeling real activist-y.
Are you?
Well, not really. I feel like it snowed today.
Yeah.
And so I'm feeling cold. I'm feeling cold.
Yeah,
today.
I don't really have, the snow is not, my first response is not to go out and march in the streets from it. I kind of just want to stay in my room.
How dare you?
Up. I moved away from Colorado to get away from this.
She's like, I didn't want to be out there.
Portland,
today.
why are you coming for me so? I really did not want the snow today.
You're trying to remind me of home. How dare you?
I'm just kidding. It's actually not too bad because it didn't really stick on the ground a whole lot, and it's not anything compared to the snow that you see in Colorado.
Right.
So.
Well, and Grand Junction, Colorado did get its fair share of snow, but it was weird. You'd have all 3 seasons in a day.
Yeah. Also, it was just very inconsistent with their winters. Sometimes you would have a winter where it the snow melted off the ground before noon all winter long.
So weird.
Yeah. Yeah, it's because we were in a desert. We were in a dry, prickly desert.
Prickly.
Kind of like your vagina.
Oh my god, my vagina. Oh, by the way, that reminds me. Donna, what are you wearing this evening?
I'm actually just dressed as the bird that was on Lady Gaga's dress during the inauguration.
Oh, I kind of see it.
Yeah.
The gold.
And the
yeah.
beak,
That makes more sense. I was kind of confused.
I felt like it was a missed opportunity during our inauguration episode. So here, about 5 episodes later, I'm dressed as her bird.
Oh,
yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So 2
what about
months
you? Explain your ensemble.
So I'm dressed as a cactus. That's why Donna commented on that.
The desert, and the dryness, like her vagina.
Yeah, like my vagina, except it's a whole cactus costume, but it's actually really chic. It's form fitting, and I'm wearing this beautiful skirt and this mermaid bottom, and then it has little cactuses on it, and then on top of my head I did have a cactus, but it fell, stabbed my arm, and now there's blood. So the hairpiece is a no for me. It's gonna be a no. But
it's a little disturbing.
Yeah, I know, but I am wearing this cute little blonde number, white girl blonde, just because I wanted to make it sure it was out of place.
I dig it. You're a beautiful prickly pear tonight.
Yay. Oh my goodness. So just a quick update for all of you listeners. Me and Donna have to say that we're so proud of the fact that we actually got ahead of schedule for a Jade.
Yeah, we did. So the cool thing about that is that a lot of these episodes that you're going to be hearing are going to be recorded previously and just kind of interviews with some of the people that are in the Portland community that we wanted to really make sure that we boosted up on our platform because they either lead really interesting, unique lives or are just staples here in the scene that we've come up in over the last couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely. And so with that, Donna, how are you doing this evening?
Oh, Coco, I will let you know after this brief commercial break when we bring on our guest. Do you wear t-shirts? Do you wear a face mask?
I sure as hell hope so.
Do you put on your silly little t-shirt and your silly little face mask and wish you had something a little more out there?
Yes.
Even something, dare I say, matching?
Girl, yes, duh.
Then it looks like HunterDrips.com is exactly what you need. At HunterDrips.com, socially relevant merch and apparel is up for sale. That's never for profit. 50 to 100% of every purchase is donated.
I hear they carry matching shirts and masks with designs that say cute little slogans like Defund the Police, Black Lives Matter, and it goes over your nose. And even shirts and hats with your own pronouns on them. You know, things that are important.
Oh, so you mean important. And almost all of it is donated?
Yes, donated. And guess what?
What? It's size inclusive too?
Yes, up to 5XL. Why just make clothes for skinny people? It's all made by Queer Artist Girl. The creator of HunterDrips.com is trans, fat, lesbian, and the site also includes merch from other queer artists, including gay Portland rapper Tono.
Listeners, head on over to hunterdrips.com and use the code SECRET for 15% off your purchase today.
That's SECRET for 15% off your purchase at hunterdrips.com.
It's a podcast with Coco and Donatella podcast. Tune into What They Tell You podcast with Coco and Donatella podcast.
You know, Coco, I am feeling like I'm in the true activist spirit because we have a great guest on tonight. We have Tifah. How are you doing tonight?
Oh, I'm good. I'm great. I'm snowed in and living the dream.
Right? Isn't this weird? This is my first snow that hasn't lasted less than an hour in Portland. I feel like it's usually off the ground by noon because it's melted away, but it was nice to have a little taste of Colorado getting this heavy snow for a while.
It was. It really was. And then obviously the city shut down.
Right.
Yeah.
We've had such weird weather. It was nice to have something normal for a second. Oh, this is supposed to happen. Perfect. I'll take it. I don't really care at this point.
Yeah,
and
for real.
It's so funny because I'm the new event manager at Local, and
she's taking every opportunity to let
I
everyone
will
know
say that
that.
as much as I can. Well, no, I got a message from my boss today saying, "Oh yeah, we're closed." I was like, "It started snowing 14 minutes ago."
It took one look out the window. It's nope, and just hit that group chat right away. Yeah.
I was like, okay. So enough about how great we are. Let's talk about how great you are. So let's start off with, how did you come up with your drag name? Not that it was hard to figure out. Just tell the story of how you got there.
Well, I started doing drag mostly because people were just kind of pushing me into it. I was that kid. I was a theater kid. I always did music and whatever. I was the kid that was in the car. My mom was literally, stop lip syncing at me. No one wants to see that. Please stop. So I felt like she was always living in me, but I didn't quite know what she was. And I wanted to make sure that whatever I did with any performance, that I had something behind it. Not that I had to be this super wise philosopher every time, but just that there was more than just me getting up and being no offense to anybody, but I didn't want to just be I'm a new queen, I'm going to do Britney Spears and that's all I'm going to do. And I'm not going to think about it because I definitely have other artsy things going on. So it just felt like a way to break the ice and open up the conversation anywhere that I went, and kind of bring the everyday anti-fascist to Tifah. And so that's where she came from. It was super simple, actually.
Yeah, I think it's a good point that you bring up, that you say not to offend anyone about just going up there and doing a top 40 song and performing
kill
to
it.
But I think it's
a thing.
Yeah, kill it, do that. And you get that everywhere. But I think it's extremely important to have a message like you were talking about. I think that that's awesome. And I think that there's a really good intersection when it comes to drag and activism.
Absolutely.
And I mean, just alone in your name, I think it's such a cool concept that you've
Thank you.
created.
Yeah, I definitely wanted to make sure, drag is an art form that comes from Black trans culture and underground ballroom and things that are so much more complex in history that some of us will literally never get to know. More was lost than what we can find, unfortunately, in a lot of spaces like that. And so I wanted to make sure that if I'm going to come into drag, having been interpreting next to drag performers of all different kinds for the whole year before and being inspired by so many styles and so many different people, I didn't want to, I felt like I needed to do reverence to all the people that kind of that brought Anne out of me. And so I didn't want to just seem like it was a flippant decision. Even if I was going to do top 40, I've done a top 40 mix before, but I mixed it together and did other things and made it this Pokemon theme song thing. There was a whole mess. So, I just wanted to make sure that I was loving the people that are around me and the community that we already had and adding to it.
I think that's awesome.
It's so funny the way that you talk about these issues, because I'm going to attack
Please
you for
do.
a second. Because what's really interesting about activism is people think that they're not approachable, but I have to say, girl, you were one of the most approachable people. Like, yeah, like obviously we see you on the news, we see you at protests, we see you at riots, like we see you signing at a drag event, we see you performing at a drag event or whatever. And I know that energy, that like I can do this energy, is like sometimes intimidating to people. But like literally every time I've had a conversation with you, it's like we're professional and responsible and like good rhetoric and good dialogue, and like you're just so easy to get along with that it's stupid. Like, I would just like kind of expect you to be this horrible monster of a person that like the second I say hello and you'd be like, that is problematic this week, and I'd be like, okay, well, oh, I guess we'll just like walk over there. I guess.
Oh my god, no! I like anybody that really gets to know me knows that I just wear everything on my sleeve. I have sort of like I like half of it is like me, half of it is like a trauma response, you know, being like, here's everything, like, you know, I'm not hiding anything, I swear, and like, but like I want to be loud all the time, and I just want to like be whatever, but I just like fucking love people, so I'm happy to hear you say that, because I feel the same way, and I definitely know I can be prickly. But I'm also not like from the Pacific Northwest. So, you know, Mama is from the desert and has some cactusy thorns on her, and like I play a different game. So I think that like, you know, some of us are on that wavelength and we're like, I see you, and it keeps it super chill, you know?
Yeah, I do. I super agree.
Well, you mentioned just now a little bit about your upbringing. So where do you originate from, and how did you end up in Portland?
I was born and raised in Tucson, Arizona. So it's like an hour south of Phoenix.
Yeah.
And I ended up in Portland because my ex... What a story. No one's ever heard this one before.
Like, oh,
you know,
here we go.
There was
we
really
might have
cute
heard it.
white man, and I just had to have him, so here I am. And yeah,
dang,
so yeah, so I'm like, sorry if any listeners are triggered. I should have put like a warning before that. But yeah, so here I am, just living the dream. Yeah.
I feel like that might not even be the first time that story has been told on our podcast.
I know. So I was like, what is this? Like, they're like, well, there was this like really, it was the interview with Atlas.
Katya too.
I feel like that.
Katya.
Yeah, I had a Katya flashback for sure to that same thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't know if I can be interviewed. It's just the same information. Like, people might get bored. I don't know.
That was really funny. So great. Let's move on to something more specific. So let's talk about, how long have you been doing drag?
My first drag it had to be like October 2019. I did Baby Queers, that used to be hosted by Lolita Yayo, now known as the Antichrist, who is my like unofficial drag mother. And our whole thing was like, I'm going to tell everyone that I hate her in the beginning and that she's going to claim me as her daughter. And that was going to be our thing for a good year. So I'm officially announcing, yes, she is my drag mother. I've talked a lot of shit about her on purpose. Like, she fully consented and fed it. It was wonderful. But yeah, did Baby Queers, and then just like dove in from there. So not really that long at all.
Yeah, that's great. But wow. I remember looking at your Instagram, and hopefully I'll remember to post some photos because I've been so bad about that recently. You have this like really artistic take, like from the get, like, which I like, where does that come from? Like, what's your inspiration?
I feel like I'm just a little bit of a sponge. I like to, I mean, you know, like I said, I was interpreting next to all different types of drag performers at Local Lounge and CC's and everywhere for a while. So I got really inspired by, you know, I loved like Rita Lynn's Pumpkin Spice Latte number, where it was all about like the layers of existence, but like she funneled fucking pumpkin spice latte into her mouth, like stuff like that. Or like Jocelyn Knobs building like an entire thing that glows in the dark and then opens and there's people inside of like this underworld Nina West moment. Like, you know, there's just all these like incredible pieces of drag that were around me that I just felt like, you know, I've always been, like I said, a theater kid. I'm a musician. I make music. And so I kind of like to create worlds and do artsy random things and make people see something maybe that they didn't think of before. One of my favorite numbers was when I had people like put ornaments into my body and then I like bled green paint to make a Christmas tree. Just little things like that, like, I think are exciting, and I just have a weird idea and I run with it. And sometimes it works and sometimes it does not.
So I have a question. Were you just solely interpreting prior to performing, or did the interpreting come after, or was it, so which came before?
When I moved to Portland, I very much was like, I'm gonna, be quiet and work my way up kind of thing. I had just released music, but I didn't really know how to push it and I didn't know anybody. So I kind of took a back seat and was just interpreting. And I actually met Rita Lynn at a trans poetry reading night, and that I happened to be interpreting at, and she came up and was like, hey, I do drag shows. I don't even know how we would do that, but if we could do that, that'd be great. So it was that interaction and me going to the Tuesday night shows at Local Lounge that happened first. And then I just sort of planted seeds with people, was like, I really want to do this. How would I even start? Where do I begin? How do I get booked? Like, what do I even have to do with that? And so, yeah, the interpreting the art came first in life, but the interpreting came first in this. Yeah,
for sure.
How did you learn to sign?
I taught myself. I saw this deaf kid in church when I was little, and then I bought a book, and I grew up just learning. I didn't really have any deaf friends until high school, when I started going to deaf night out and ASL practice nights at restaurants that they used to have. And then in college is when I took my first ASL class and officially got into it. Was like, oh, this could be my career. I didn't even know interpreting was a real thing. I just learned sign language because I thought it was cool. And I had friends that took it, and I was always taking other classes. My high school didn't even offer a sign language class. So just it was my hobby.
That's really cool.
That's really cool.
It's just a hobby. I just liked it.
I
thought there was gonna be this huge backstory.
It's so bored. They're like, oh my god, what is your journey? I'm like, I don't know. I bought a book and then it was cool, and I'm sorry. Yeah, I don't know. I wish I had something way more exciting.
Yeah.
So actually, I do have a question. Who is one of the biggest names in your signing career that you've interpreted, signed for? Is interpreted?
Yeah, it depends on what realm, I guess. I've interpreted for political side. I mean, I interpreted for Trump during his rally when he came to Tucson during his campaign.
Wow.
I was not, so to be clear, he didn't hire sign language interpreters. I went incognito in a bunch of jeans and camouflage hats and a white t-shirt with some deaf friends who wanted to check it out for themselves, and interpreted there for them. But we did get hired at the Bernie Sanders rally, so politicians on that level. In terms of music, we've gotten to do Erykah Badu, Fleetwood Mac. We did the Wild and Out tour when they came here 2 years ago. That was really wild and fantastic. Doing TED Talks for people that are, at the top of their class. Yeah, I guess that. Yeah.
Wow, that's fantastic. Do you ever let's talk about something controversial, because this is a drag related podcast, and this came up. This is it's not even a drag related thing I was going to bring up, but I'm just glad to say that apparently.
Yeah. We like to claim that this is a drag related podcast, but then we slap you across the face with some politics every once in a while.
The rest is drag, right? So we'll just stuff it under that umbrella. This is all drag, it's fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do you feel about so wasn't the big scandal at the inauguration that there was somebody signing? What was the scandal?
Oh yeah,
about that?
I have not heard of it.
So this is a great topic.
What was
that?
That?
So because I initially spoke up about it after talking with some deaf friends, and then more information came out, and we were like, "Oops, okay, cool, never mind, it's fine." So there are, I guess, layers to it, right? So the woman who did it, her father or her grandfather was deaf, so she is what is considered a CODA, a child of deaf adults. And that is sort of a intersectional identity where a hearing person's parents are deaf, who are culturally deaf, use ASL, think like a deaf person, act like a deaf person, whatever, but they are hearing. So a lot of times it's sort of I grew up in Tucson, so the closest sort of equivalent that I have is first or second generation Mexican Americans who learn English, who sort of have to like become this cultural like interpreter, translator, facilitator for their parents, or really any first generation, but
Sure.
being from Tucson, I'm just using that as an example. And so ASL is her first language, and she is culturally part of the deaf community while not being a deaf person. So her speaking and signing was in honor of that, to bring sort of accessibility to that moment, and to bring like the intersection of her identity to that moment in honor of her deaf family. So while it was great that she was asked to do that, because there was no ASL interpreter physically there, because no deaf people were there, she did that. So the initial sort of kerfuffle was that she is a hearing person. And if people don't know that she's a coda or doesn't have that intimate proximity to deaf culture, that is like, can seem appropriative only in the sense that then that video gets shared to like everybody, and they're like, oh my god, sign language, and it's so pretty, and like bloop 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 bloop, and like we don't talk about like deaf issues or like deaf inclusion. Like it would have been, and I'm sure this, that she agrees, that it would have been cool to have a deaf person there to do that. In the end of the day, she is still the best choice to do that, because it's her rank, it's her job, it's her skill, it's her identity, and she still is representing for deaf culture that includes codas. And it would be different if it was someone like me who didn't grow up in deaf culture. I don't have deaf family. While I have deaf friends, and while I've had deaf friends for years, and I'm close to the community and whatever, I'm not part of it. And so while it wouldn't be seen in the same light, and it wouldn't be shared then with that same context behind. So that was like the sort of fluff around it, but that's all of the cultural context around it that people, I guess, didn't really have access to.
Yeah, that makes a lot more sense. Well, and then the reason I was asking that is, how do you deal with that, in the sense of like the appropriative nature of, well, now you even admitting on the podcast that you're not a coda, you didn't grow up, you did it because it was like, I wanted to learn this thing, and that's great because you expanded your skill sets. But how do you deal with that, especially in Portland, because Portland feels a way about things quickly.
They do. Well, and the deaf world is so small, and so the interpreting world is really, really small too. We are like 1 degree of separation from each other, truly. So the ASL interpreting like field at large has a history of being very ableist, very oddist, like not centering deaf people. It's a bunch of typically like white women, like, I'm going to save the deaf people because I knew sign language from church. Like, that's what it is. Like, and if people who push back on that are probably the white women offended by that statement, to be honest, because we can acknowledge that that's part of our field and not have to like attack individual white women about it. Like in general, that's what our field is. That's what the history is. Period. Deaf people like were like started it, were pushed back, and now we're trying to like get them to the forefront of it again. As an interpreter, it's natural that I'm going to get attention because we're not ubiquitous enough for it to not be cool. If we saw interpreters everywhere, it wouldn't be as exciting as if we see it in the few times that we do see it. If access and inclusion and representation were everywhere, sign language wouldn't be super like, ooh, like it's still beautiful, right? That's fine. Like that can all be there, but not in the like, like this sort of monolithic, like mystical creature that is ASL with like no engagement that people typically find. So interpreters were kind of like taught how to balance that, how to push away from us and be like, hey, oh my God, I'm so cool. You should hire a deaf person. Like how to sort of shift that energy away. It's different for me because I run fingers crossed and I'm very like visible. So I really try to balance my platform between sharing resources that I know and boosting deaf people and deaf creatives who should be the forefront of like dialogues because of lived experience. I also have caught flack and like been canceled in the past because I did a TED talk about interpreting, and that was like a shit show nightmare of an experience. And TED is terrible. I'm just gonna say it like on wax. They, especially TEDx Bend, Mo Carrick, you can get some like whoo. They are, it's a nightmare.
Yeah.
And so you can edit that out if you want, but like,
Oh, no, you're
No.
fine.
but yeah, that shit was like a nightmare. And so what happens from there is that rapid sort of dialogue, right? Of like, here's these interpreters, and it did this thing, and da 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 da, and like, and we got caught in like the whirlwind that sort of you mentioned, the Portland whirlwind. But because our community is so small, like the whole world was playing. So I feel like there are complicated dialogues that are happening now that have never happened before because deaf people have not been platformed in the ways that they are currently. And so interpreters are going to make lots of mistakes. We're going to overstep. We're going to overreach because we have had the freedom to overstep and overreach and be advocating for things for so long because deaf people aren't in the room. Now there's a ton of deaf people in the room. And the interpreters are learning the ways that we can step back or step beside or, you know, like step in different ways. And so hearing people, that being said, hearing people should never be gaining clout off of ASL or deaf culture. We should not be teaching ASL. We should not be doing like TikTok videos where we're like signing music and like, oh my God, look how many followers I have. Because deaf creatives do that and they get no followers, no likes, no support. And on top of like being deaf in a hearing world where like you have access to nothing and finally here's this platform where you can share your language and like hearing people are all over it, like doing it, like it's cultural appropriation. It's like so disgusting and it's something that people don't talk about. So there is like that layer of like visibility is cool if you're like focusing on deaf people, but if you're just in it to like sign your own stuff and like be cool, you're probably signing wrong first of all because you're hearing and you don't know what you're doing. And yeah, so that was like a very long-winded answer, but it was a complicated question.
No.
That was the most interesting thing I have heard
I honestly,
in a long time.
Yeah, it's honestly stuff that we just don't think about. And that kind of brings me to my next question. What are some things that we as queer people in these spaces can do to be better?
I mean, I can answer for things that I do to be an ally, but my first recommendation to anybody is engage with deaf people and ask them what they want, what they need. And it's one thing to remember too about accessibility and disability justice in general is that because we live in a world that was not universally designed and is not universally accessible, what is going to be accessible for one person may end up being inaccessible for another person. So there are deaf people who need an ASL interpreter. There are deaf people who need captions. There are deaf people who need both. There are deaf people who are also blind and need their sign language protactilely under their hands, like physical sign language. There are, you know, people who are deaf but low vision who just need to sit closer and have a dark background that's contrasted. Like there's a million different things and like there's no way that we can think of all of them or accommodate everybody. No. And so moving forward, like captioning videos, like literally just Googling best practices for captioning will tell you which fonts to use, how to like black out the back of your screen, like where to put it on the screen so that people can figure it out. I mean, really just like engagement. And one thing too, as like the interpreter for like the deaf shows, like we really don't have a lot of interpreters who are skilled in interpreting music, plus are like well-versed in queer culture to keep up with y'all. Cause like, frankly, half the time, like, we're like repairing and like giving more context. We're like, here's what they're talking about. Here's what this word means. Like, you know, like, oh, they said this like queer slang or they referenced this weird RuPaul thing. Like, that's why actually Sinombre and I are doing our series because like none of that is accessible. Like that, like RuPaul doesn't caption her videos. And if the auto captions aren't fully correct, which newsflash, they're not, like, how do you have access to, like, how does YouTube auto captions know how to be like, you know, like, Shantae, you stay okay, you know, like all our weird, like, how do you read that? And you're like, oh yeah, I get that. Like, that's not real life. Or like, or half of the things that she does, like, that they reference on that show are like old queer movies that like, where's the captioned version of that? Where's the deaf, you know, discussion about that? Like, there's just not a connection there. So when we're interpreting drag shows, we're doing a lot more than just word for word what's happening. We're adding a lot, we're explaining a lot, we're spelling out these words and then being like, do you have a sign for, you know, what is the sign for like for Slay, like I don't fucking know. Like I can come up with conceptual things that show what you mean, but there's not like a sign for that.
Oh, that's an interesting point. Like, how would you describe to? I always like to talk about it in the sense of the alien analogy too. Like, how would you describe to an alien what "slay bitch" yes
Yeah.
means? And that would be almost nearly impossible to a degree because you're just like,
Context.
yeah,
And you
context
need,
is super
yeah.
important. But that, yeah, I can see where you're getting at, and I never even considered that one because I'm hearing and incredibly privileged in that, and I have to really acknowledge that and take a step back and think. But I've never heard that before, and this will be good for our
Yeah.
listeners too.
Well, what does preparation typically look like for a show? So you have all these queens submitting these mixes. I'm sure you have to listen through everything, and it's not always just going to be like a straight track from, you know, like a top 40 hit or anything like that. So how long does it normally take?
We like to have so for a big like concert, we would sometimes have their set list even up to like a month in advance so that we can really get it down. Fortunately, me and the other interpreter who does this a lot, Carly Jones, we listen to top 40, we listen to lots of music, we try to stay abreast on what people may do, but especially, like you said, a mix, it's going to be really hard. One good example is Sue from Corporate does this mix where it's from The Devil Wears Prada, and she's talking about like, that cerulean is a chain of blah, 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 blah. And we had to pick this, and then it was on this runway. And it's like, and the way she says it, and it's all this history and whatever. And then it switches to that, like, Gucci, Cartier, whatever that song is. I don't know the words. But, like, having to sort of, like, explain, like, this is okay, what you're about to hear or what you're about to witness and see visually is, like, a mix of this movie with this song that is called this, and I have to show like when I'm Meryl Streep and when I'm the song, and we have to sign those differently so that switch makes sense. Or, you know, yeah. So there's a lot of preparation that goes into trying to figure out how we're going to get that information to somebody. Someone also recently just did a mix where it was like a Taylor Swift song with that driver's license song that like drives me crazy and is everywhere.
Oh my God.
It's everywhere. Okay, so I watched a YouTube video about that song, and there's Disney Girl drama around it. Oh man, it's juicy. I live for stuff like this. But
I need to go down that rabbit hole.
I'll send you all the links, girl. I got you. Yeah.
Okay.
But they were like putting the songs together, and it switches from the verse one into the pre-chorus of the other one, and then the two choruses are on top of each other. So I'm like, okay, well, I can't sign two songs at the same time. So I have to sign one over here, switch to the other one over here, and then when they're together, I literally, how I handle it, and every interpreter is different, but we'll pick, like, okay, now I'm signing this part of the chorus that leads into this part of this chorus that leads into the, like, I have to show that they're blending. There's, like, things going on, like, meta-linguistically that, like, we're adding in as well. So it takes repeatedly listening to those mixes.
I did not know any of that.
That's why we're kind of like, hey, can you please send your music? Hey, can you please send your music? Because if it's, you know, I mean, if it's, like, levitating, like, that's on the radio every 9 seconds. You cannot escape Dua Lipa. And thankfully, like...
Right.
Like, no offense to her either. Like, top 40 pop is, like, so predictable painfully that, like, when you're turning it into a conceptual language, there's only so much you can do. Because, like, you know, she's saying the same thing for, like, 9 choruses. You know, it's, like, the same. We get it. You're levitating. Your heart. Oh, my God. You're in love. Like, the moonlight, the starlight. Like, okay, I get it. Like, it's not
how many different ways are you gonna say it?
That's not like as visually exciting. Like I try to explain to someone too, like with rap and hip hop, right? Like rap and hip hop are super exciting because how people are using their words and what it sounds like and what that effect is on us is totally part of it. You could be saying something like you could be saying whatever you want, but if it sounds cool or you have a specific cadence or you're rhyming words at a certain part in the beat, that's an exciting thing to our ear auditorily. But like then hearing people think that when they interpret rap that they have to like be going really fast doing this, and then you're like, that's not like to watch a blur of hands is not exciting. But to remove that concept and to rebuild that concept to something that makes sense visually and conceptually and culturally is like part of the mission when we do anything like that too. Wow. So there's a lot of pieces to it.
My goodness. I feel
Yeah.
like I'm just being so schooled right now.
Yeah.
And in an incredibly approachable way.
That's so weird.
That's so weird. It's crazy. And I do want our listeners to understand, like, some of the stuff obviously is incredibly new for me and Donatello, so we're just fascinated by it. But like as Anjay Tifa here said, like I believe that accessibility also you can learn on your own too. Like just as long as you go out there and find the information. And here's the thing though, a lot of the stuff that you've told us is not questions I would have even considered to ask.
Yeah.
Nobody's ever said any of this stuff to me before because ignorance and privilege. I mean, that's just what happens.
I mean, and here we are sitting on a platform that's, auditory.
Yeah.
It's all auditory, and there are definitely so many different accessibility issues, and we need to be better if we can. And it's really important, honestly, having these conversations with you. I know that we wanted to do what we can to make this more accessible.
Yeah, one of my favorite podcasts actually did this recently, which I thought was super interesting, because I didn't know how they could do this, but of course they're like super famous now and they have tons of money. Every episode now they have a YouTube link, and there's two people on the podcast, and so they just have two different interpreters who just interpret the entire episode, and they just have a link now for every other episodes. And I was like, gosh, that seems incredibly simple in the sense of like making it accessible. And so they just add it, they just release it at the same time that they do the episodes. So they take a little bit more time in their editing room, of course, so they get both released at the same time to make it more fun and fair for everybody. And I was like, gosh, that seems really easy to do. Well, that they have the access to doing that as well.
Yeah, I know that people have limited time and resources and knowledge, and it's just about it's that each one teach one. Like, it's just being loud and talking about it anytime you're in the room. Like, hey, accessibility, when it comes to a podcast, like a transcript is great, getting interpreters is even better. That assumes sometimes that you have interpreters readily available. Sometimes money can become an issue, like, which is thankfully interpreters negotiate and like do good stuff. Thankfully, not all of them do, but like navigating your way through that and being willing to give that little bit of time is really all that it takes. Like, it's just a little bit of patience. And I wish that I could remember exactly how he said it, but basically there's this guy on Instagram who does a lot of really cool stories about political quick, whatever, and recently made one that he captioned and has since been captioning all his videos about how he had all these people reaching out saying that info is great, but if it's not able to reach everyone and it's inaccessible, then like it's not revolutionary. It doesn't really matter. Like, how can we fix that? And he was like, yeah, navigating my privilege of being able to say what I am and am not allowed to, like, or am not able to give access to, like, is a piece of privilege that we often don't think about. Like, we are able to navigate these things and provide access. It's just hard, but it's not impossible. And then there are things already set up for us to be able to successfully do that, as long as we're connecting and engaging with each other. It's just the same as anything else.
Yeah, it makes sense because it just has a lot to do, and this applies to almost like everything when it comes to like privilege and accessibility. The line that I heard once was, it's okay for someone to be uncomfortable. It causes them a little bit of discomfort because they don't understand what's happening specifically in a moment. And this applies to so many different layers of activism. Oh, yeah. Be like, understanding that it's going to cause discomfort, especially if they don't even know what you're talking about. And like, but honestly, for people in certain different marginalized communities, they're uncomfortable a lot of the time. And so the privileged groups being like 5 minutes of being like really embarrassed or humiliated, because those are words that we don't ever really use for the privileged, but when they're embarrassed or humiliated, they can get through that discomfort as long as we let them live in that discomfort to learn better.
Well, and it's like, and it's not letting people off the hook with just like, okay, I'm ready to learn. Like, learning is action and learning is fluid. We learn every day, especially in a movement. Movements change every day. We might still be fighting for similar goals, but what it looks like is very different today even than it was yesterday. And the day, yesterday or 48 hours ago, we had a mayor that didn't mace someone in the face. And now 24 hours ago, now we do have a mayor that maced someone in the face. So like, The movement's going to change every day. Little details going to change every day. How are we going to, and that's like a very small thing, but it does change the dialogue. It doesn't have to be a violent thing. It could be a brand new person moves into town and has a great new perspective. Like, you just never know. And like being able to learn out loud, stay radically accountable to each other, because that is like a pure form of love, in my opinion, is that like radical accountability. Like, I think that it's just, it's being able to, it's progress over purity and progress over perfection, right? Like, but just not being used to excuse things, more of just like, we're doing the best we can.
So I want to switch gears for the last few moments of our episode here, because I think it's really important for our listeners. Like, we say this on the podcast a lot, that BLM protests and riots happen for roughly about 3 to 4 months here. And you were heavily involved in being out there most every day, or how often you went. I don't actually know your life like that. But, but tell us about kind of like a really high level, like, what was that experience like for you? Obviously, being a person who's not Black, by the way, listeners, and JT, being as a person who's not Black, being in a very Black-focused movement for so long.
Yeah. So my fingers crossed interpreting and just sort of my like activism, like really diving into it, turning it into action, started with Occupy ICE a summer about 3-4 years ago, however long it was. And I was there because deaf people showed up. So I definitely want to like make that known first. Like, the deaf community showed up and interpreters responded. That was not something that I mean, I was going and supporting anyway, but it was like, oh, here's a need, because deaf people are like out in the streets also doing the thing, So I definitely want to like give credit where credit is due, that the deaf community is radical as fuck out here and like brought us out there. The quote unquote like Portland George Floyd uprising of 2020, whatever. I would say that like really, I mean, I was just at the ICE building, like not last night. I mean, people have been in the streets every day since that started. There was a big, hype for like a few months, but after even the hype went away, people have still been out. People have still been arrested and tear gassed, and the same energy has been going on, just with a lot less people, unfortunately. And we lost a lot of numbers. We lost a lot of people for many different reasons that like is too big for the few minutes we have here now. I feel like I am very thankful because I interpret for so many different groups. I'm able to talk to a lot of different people and sort of actively live the things that I'm learning in the moment, and being able to practice it and change it and get a new perspective on it. I'm so thankful for like, especially the Black women and femmes and the Indigenous people who like have been just fighting for like since Occupy ICE. Like, let me kind of sneak in like this little white kid, like, I'm gonna sign language for you, and like really like saw that as important and was like, it's fine that you're white, like you're doing this thing. Like, how can we get other Black and brown people to do this? But like, you have a skill that is important for the movement. And like sort of being able to like have a skill validated, have a role, like fill a place and be able to learn, like, is invaluable. I am so thankful it changed me as a person. And I think that anybody can have that experience if they're coming in with the humility of not just like my white guilt is so crippling to me that I literally won't do anything. Like, it seems to me that like we really just desperately need people to like humanize each other, communicate with each other, and like really, really like get moving on stuff. So it's been, I don't want to like make it seem like it's been this cool like learning moment for me, or that it's been inspired, like people have been so many, I have interpreted so many vigils just in the last year, like for people that are like just hashtags, but like also people in the community. Like, there's youth activists here that knew Travis Nagdy when he was like murdered. And like that like broke my heart, because those are like my friends and that was their friend. And like now I'm like, we literally live in a city where my friends are getting FBI door knocks, where my friends are the ones who like are one moment away from being a hashtag because we live with, like a situation that is so unsafe and violent. So it's also not like a fun learning, like, wow, I really learned a lot and I've grown so much because like Black and brown people were getting murdered. Like that feels so icky. So I don't know if I have the words to fully describe that feeling.
You know what's actually interesting though when you talk about that specific subject is one thing that I found to be incredibly disappointing, especially obviously it was happening in Portland. Like those, protests were happening in Portland. One thing I found to be incredibly disappointing across the board was that I knew of people who were going to those marches, going out in support, and numbers of movement are important.
Right.
We all know that. Like that's why Selma was so important. Like numbers are important. But what I was finding is when people just like almost like it would be like if somebody showed up to Selma to march across that bridge and then like went home and just was like a terrible, horrible racist. Here in Portland, sometimes, and actually
a lot of the time,
that they were out in those streets like not learning anything. So
as
like
a performance.
as much as you said it's almost icky saying I learned something, I almost find it to be ickier when somebody didn't learn anything. Like marching in the streets and then coming back home and being terrible.
Well, and then also doing it just to be like, I did my part. Now people, like people can get off my back because I did that.
Yeah, and what's frustrating too is when you can really tell who only knows like 3 Black women ever because they like, you can really tell.
So
they will really be like, listen to Black women, and there's like 3, and it's like 2 of them they've never met, and 1 is their neighbor that they like, that they met. Like there's just like because like Black women, like that alone is just like so reductive to the Black experience, the woman experience. It's the ways that like it is used. Not that I'm not trying to say that we need to like. I'm not saying abolish the title Black women. Like I'm saying like, if only we could get away from all those identities.
All right, we're gonna have to make this episode another hour long.
Yeah, you're like, wait, Angie Tifah wants to abolish Black women. Like, no, like, but I want to abolish the ways that people use that to defend their complacency and white supremacy. Frankly, because Black women in the movement disagree. Because Black women in the movement are a spectrum. And so instead of just centering this Black woman and saying center Black women, it means step the fuck back and see the whole spectrum and respect what the fuck is not our thing to speak on, which is a lot of shit, and be thankful that we get to learn at all. Because we in 2021, when we have the internet and we have zines and we have people and we have all these resources readily available that are hard to navigate in many ways, but are still readily available nonetheless for a lot of people, it is a privilege to get to learn it from someone's like life and mouth. Like that communication is like a piece of humanity. It is sacred. Like communicating with a human, like we developed language and we developed gesture and we developed pieces of art to communicate with each other. Like it should not be a flippant thing. Like that is a sacred moment. So like I totally agree. Like if you were out in those streets to get tear gas just to say you got tear gas, like you were part of the problem. Like that's that, and that's still happening. There are still people in the streets who are still there on a glory high, and that is something that is like where we have to sift through the theater of it. Some part of activism and some part of movements is a theater and is creating a moment. That's totally part of it. But if people show up for the movement and they forget about the yesterday and the tomorrow, then they're missing why that movement and why that moment was so important. And it's been disappointing to go through the last 3 years, really, because Occupy and then disarm PSU, and then this, and then this, and then this, and then this. It's been, Patrick Kimmons was murdered, and then this happened. Like, there's so many things that our community is constantly dealing with. I can't blame people for needing to take a step back and, like, take a breather. We also need to, like, remember that, like, it is an unbroken chain of resistance that is thousands of years old, that goes far before us and will go far beyond us. And we just really need to strengthen that link right now the best that we can.
Yeah,
That was so well said.
yeah, that was
Yeah.
really well said. I'm gonna probably figure out one of those quotes to use as a title of this episode.
I liked you talking about the history of the movement, you know, like not just focusing on a movement when it's in the
Yeah.
news, you know, understanding where it's rooted and understanding the people that are involved in it. It's so key to being a productive ally.
To marry what you said, like I did see an article recently about Stacey Abrams where it was pretty much like, to paraphrase, was like, you do realize she's actually real,
Right.
right? I was like, oh,
Yeah.
no, I
Right.
didn't actually. I didn't realize that she was a real person. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't realize that Black women, even though they are magic, as all of them are, um, they're also still real people with differences of opinions.
Yeah.
And the phrase Black women is getting this like heightened sense of
Yeah.
responsibility without any of like the detail,
The understanding.
the understanding.
We're
of
just
detail,
like
yeah,
putting
It's
this
just
up
like,
on a pedestal that's like built with like bendy straws, and we're just like, okay, like, wow, you're so cool and strong, and they're like, I don't know if this is stable, and we're like, no, like, you're so strong, you'll get through it, like,
You got
it's
this.
a nightmare, and it's like it's what
Yeah.
I mean, to like really name it, like, it perpetuates violence. It's like a systemic violence of like
yeah,
removing
it does.
humanity from Black people, but especially Black women and femmes, and just expecting them that they like, you know, it's the hyper like, if you can get through it, that you can get through anything. Like, how about, you know, that people do that with Teresa Rayford too. Like, I got to, you know, I've gotten to like listen to music and like dance around with Teresa. Like, we're friends, we talk. Like, when people are like, Teresa Rayford is this magical human, I'm like, yes, and she is also a human who like is tired because there's a city on her back because she's a Black woman who can't go home during her election because the death threat she's receiving. But like, you know,
Yeah,
she
right.
can't go on Twitter and be like, I'm an everyday anti-fascist like Sarah Iana Roan can. Like, that's not the way that the world works. And like, you know, I want people to keep in mind too that like Teresa Rayford ran next to a Democratic mayor. So Democrats and leftists and stuff were the people that were tearing her apart and perpetuating that stuff. Like, Lyndon B. Johnson was a Democrat when they assassinated MLK and was running on a lot of platforms that like Democrats are like still dancing around with. And progress is great, and we need to celebrate those and keep history in context and be like, none of this shit is going to save us. Like, we literally need to have us. And it starts with taking Black women off of that shaky pedestal and like giving them what they actually need to get the shit done. Like, you know, there's like other stuff going on, and like Portland spends a lot of time building pedestals, not knowing how to reinforce them and make them, you know, real.
Ooh, good.
Damn.
That one.
Damn.
That
Too
one.
true.
I mean, as someone who
Good.
like, I am
Oh.
like, I'm just this white little like Arizona, like, you know, but like people put me on a pedestal. Like, people will, you know, I would go to those protests and like trying to get tear gas off my face, and people are like, first of all, I'm non-binary, which is like unclear sometimes, but doesn't matter. People are like, you're that sign language guy, and I'm like, what? Like, I can't see, you know, hold on, like, I don't.
Yeah.
They're like, you're my hero, like, I love you, like, I follow you on Instagram. I'm like, I appreciate it, and like, can you DM me later? Like, now is not the time.
Can you
Like
DM me
that,
later?
you know, people are crying for help. Like, can we talk about me later? Like, you know, or like,
Yeah.
or we are all sharing our opinions, right? Like, I'm very loud, we all know it, whatever. Like, that's like, I don't shy away from it. I own everything I say. Like, that's fine. I do that because I want to play the social media game, because I want to be accountable. But also, like, it's like, if you want me on this like big pedestal, like, I'm going to continue to humanize myself as someone who is imperfect, because like I am not perfect. I don't know everything. Nobody has anything to prove to me. Don't prove to me that you were out on the streets. I'm just asking questions on why people are not in general. And if the answer is because I cannot, perfect. Let everyone see the reasons why people cannot go on the streets, so that we can build intersectional movements that include all those people as well.
Allow that.
Like, you know,
Oh,
yeah.
absolutely. So as we wrap up, actually, one point about that though that's really great is, I say this on my Facebook a lot. I say I keep everything on my Facebook public, and I was like, and I keep the things that I later unlearn on there as well, because I like to show people that I'm embarrassed of the things that I thought three years ago,
Yeah.
and it shows growth for the things that I
Totally.
say now. I was like, so
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's also a good way to handle like cancel culture, because a lot of the people will go out of the way to try to look for something that you've said in the past that's problematic. And I think it's great when those opportunities come up to be like, yeah, I may have thought that way at one point, but you also don't realize that I've been like 10 different people since that point.
Like,
and
I went to private Christian high school in Tucson, Arizona.
Oh my God.
Which, by the way, like during the Bush presidency, okay?
Yeah.
And I was in college during 2008 with like the height of Lil Wayne and all, you know, like I was gross.
Yeah.
Like, cancel me. Like, this is the official call.
Yeah.
Honestly, I need a break. Cancel me, maybe, so that I can take like some time off. But like,
that version of myself deserves to be canceled.
Yes, she totally does. I mean, my best friend from Tucson will share her old statuses on purpose and be like, "What the fuck is going on here? What is this disaster?" Like, you know, we've been there for sure. I own it. She public for sure. It's all there. You can find it if you need it.
If you need the cancel,
it's there. I'll send it to you.
So, and for the very end of this, I wanted to take a little bit of time just for you to plug Giving the Finger with Sin, because it is the world's first and only RuPaul's Drag Race review show that's fully in ASL, and I think that it's really awesome that you and Sin are doing that. And I just want you to take some time to just kind of tell our listeners where they can tune into that and just kind of how the idea started.
So we are on YouTube. Episode 3 is coming out soon. I know that we are about to have RuPaul's episode 5. Yes, we're a little behind. We are on what we like to call Deaf Drag Queen Standard Time, which means it's supposed to come out on Tuesday, so it'll probably be out next Thursday. So
DDST.
Yes.
Okay.
So, Giving the Finger, you can just find us. It's Giving the Finger with Sin and Anne, SIN and ANNE. But my friend told me that she just put Giving the Finger in YouTube and it was the first thing that came up. So experiment with that, trick the algorithm. We would love that. It started, like I sort of mentioned before, a lot of drag slang and a lot of things like, there were not, I assume, ASL interpreters at, like, the old balls or, like, in the clubs with, like, Amanda Lepore and, like, you know, RuPaul. Like, there wasn't an ASL interpreter, like, cat, and the face, give them face. Like, we...
Gosh, I kind of wish there was.
Should have.
Oh man.
And like, I'm sure there were deaf people there. I'm sure it's a piece of history we may, you know, find one day. But like, it really like was not a thing. So a lot of what we take for granted as our culture is things that Sin Nombre as a new drag queen and just as a queer person in general doesn't have access to, doesn't understand a lot of. They see a lot of memes or like, y'all like to you know, I mean, I say y'all like I'm not a drag queen, but we all like roast each other on Facebook and like say ridiculous left field stuff from some random show, or like, oh my god, that person's always late, or like, oh my god, that person is, you know, such a Sharon Needles, or, you know, what the fuck ever we say. Like, that makes no sense. There's no cultural comeback. So we wanted to create something that broke down deaf culture in breaking down queer culture, and watching RuPaul. And because RuPaul's Drag Race, like, obviously we all know is not, like, perfect fracking, but we... do we have to do the, like, the peppermint thing? We have to, like, like, and laugh for 104 minutes. But, like, even that moment, right? That moment was not captioned, it's not accessible, and it gets shared, and it's not, like, and who's gonna caption, like, now Bob and Peppermint are cackling maniacally for 4 minutes? Like, it just doesn't, you know? So how do we even build up who those people are? Why I need to know who Peppermint is? Like, that is queer culture and history in itself. Like, Pep is an icon, you know, in where she's from. Like, she does things. She is incredible, and she is a trans trailblazer and, like, kicks ass. And so if she doesn't have context, she doesn't matter. She's just like a drag queen to people. So yeah, we just wanted to like like do something different. There's a million RuPaul reviews, but none of them are accessible. So we caption it for people who don't know ASL. We talk about signs that, words that come up in the show, and we give signs to them. It doesn't mean that they're the official, now sign language has this word, but sort of a slang that we get to sort of create and have dialogue with other drag queens. We had a deaf drag queen in Texas reach out and was like, I started because I, saw this and thank you. And like, that's badass. So we're just have that. So really cool. We'll be releasing that. It's just the two of us. We record, edit, and do everything ourselves. So we have a little bit of a time lapse between each episode release. But yeah, that's that.
That's so cool.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Well, that officially brings us to the end of our episode. Thank you, listeners, for listening to this abnormally long episode because we were just laughing for about 40 minutes.
Right. And thank you, Anne, for being with us.
Yeah, thank you, Anne J. Tifah. Where can they follow you?
On Instagram at ANNEJTIFAH. You can also follow Fingers Crossed Interpreting on Instagram. And I also make music as Tolly, TOLLY, KITEBOY, Tolly Kiteboy on Instagram as well. And yeah, and find me on Facebook if you want to.
Awesome. Cool.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you.
Well, we have our bonus episodes on Monday, and then we have our regular episodes on Thursday. So tune in every week. And thanks for listening this week.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
This has been another episode of A Gem of a Secret podcast. The hosts of A Gem of a Secret podcast are Donatella My Secrets and Coco Gem Holiday. You may follow Donatella My Secrets at Donatella_My Secrets on Instagram. You may follow Coco Gem Holiday at Coco Gem Holiday on Instagram. Original music by Touche Douche and Party Favors. You can follow them respectively at The Touche Douche and at Party Favors Music on Instagram. For more exclusive content, visit www.agemofasecretpodcast.com. That is AJEM of a secret podcast.com. Be sure to tune in every week on Thursday for a new episode wherever you listen to podcasts. If you have any comments or questions, email us at agemofasecretpod@gmail.com. Please don't forget to like, rate, and subscribe. Until next time, goodbye.